Hello, this is a lecture discussing the information in Chapter 1. As stated prior, students can read the chapter and then listen to the lecture and take notes as you would in an in-person class, or you may listen to the lecture, take notes, and then read the chapter after. But it is also strongly suggested that you look at your study guides because those are a synthesized list of the most important concepts and terms to completely understand prior to taking your exam. And the exams in this class, as explained, are 3 chapters at a time. Okay, so let's share our screen with the PowerPoints that are uploaded also into your course. And in this chapter, we are understanding and introducing interpersonal communication to you. We first have to identify the definition of communication because there's 2 terms, interpersonal and communication. So we understand that communication is a process, and it is the process where people are sending and receiving messages, and it goes across a channel. And the channel could be a one-on-one communication, which is this course, or public speaking. So this course identifies only the interpersonal communication, which is a one-on-one interaction. So we then start identifying and looking at communication. And we understand that it's a process, but now what is a process? A process means step by step. So we first break down communication to see what, we put it under the microscope, and we see what are the 2 most essential elements in any and all communication. We have a speaker and a listener, someone that sends the message, someone that's receiving the message. And the message can go directly, linear, which is how I'm communicating now. I'm not even understanding if you're understanding what I'm saying, but the message is going in a one-way direction. For the interaction, the feedback would come back as if I asked a question, you would respond to that. And then we have different contexts, which are different situations in which the communication is happening. Right now, we are over mediated communication because there is an electronic device between us. If you are in person, that's a different type of speaking, listening context. And then in interpersonal environments, you can have a home context, you can have a workplace context, and we're going to investigate what works best in each of these different contexts. So you could see from the next slide that you can engage in different types of communication. And for each type of communication or context, we have to communicate differently to buy or make sure that the message is understood completely and not to have any communication that was unintended, whether it's a verbally unintended or nonverbal made the listener think of something other than what was being said. So in each one of these contexts, the proficient communicator needs to know how to deliver that message with accuracy. So as we were just talking about linear, interactive, and transactional, your book describes these in lengths. So we're going to skip to the next one, which shows you the picture in the book that a linear communication has a sender and a receiver. And in human communication, we call that sender a speaker and a listener. And again, it's just one-way communication as it's directed. Now with interactive, we see that there's feedback involved. So again, if I ask a question and the listener responds, that's feedback, and now we're interactive. And what we call the field of experience, I'd like to expand a little bit here, and I'm going to stop sharing this for a moment and go into your whiteboard, because I'd like you to get an understanding of all of what goes into a field of experience. So in our field of experience, we have our knowledge. Oops. We have our past experiences. We have our feelings and emotions. We have our attitudes and beliefs. So in that one phrase, field of experience, we now again put it under the microscope so that you can see that each one of us, because we are both speaker and listener, have a field of experience. And each one of us have different set of knowledge, have different set of experiences, have different feelings and emotions, have different attitudes and beliefs. So we now can actually see how there are barriers in communication. Okay, let's go back to our PowerPoint. Okay, so now we're going to get to our next model, which is the model used for interpersonal communication, and that's transactional. And what is the difference? Well, here we see that a speaker speaks, a listener listens, and then feedback. That was interactive. But now, in many of our situations, as I'm speaking, you can be speaking too simultaneously. It's like double Dutch rope, okay? Two things happening at the same time. It's not just speaker speaks, and now you know when to listen and when to speak or rebut or answer. It's just like a conversation. You never know when it's your turn to step in with your ideas, and that's why sometimes we interrupt. So that's transactional communication. It has the components of the other two. The only thing is that in home situations with interpersonal communication relationships between family members or in friend situations, it's not always a very cut and dry speaker speaks and the listener knows when it's their turn to speak. It's quite opposite of that. And that's what transactional model of communication is. Even in the workplace, your boss may be instructing you to do something, and at one point you have a question, so you stop in the middle and you ask your question. So your boss is speaking and you're asking the question simultaneously, and that's the transactional model. So what is interpersonal communication? Well, we say it is a dynamic form of communication because there's so many parts. And that's what dynamic means. It's like a prism, or when you were a kid, you had that kaleidoscope with all those different shapes and different types of a variety of shapes as you turned it. That's dynamic, having many dimensions. So a dynamic form of communication between two people, and the reason it says or more is because sometimes even in a group communication where group starts at the number 3, you may have a different interpersonal communication with just one other person in that group. So for example, when I go to a department meeting, we're 6 people. I have a different interpersonal communication with one of my colleagues than I would with my dean. So you can see that even with more people, we may have a different interpersonal communication with just one other member of that group. So a dynamic form of communication between 2 or more people in which the messages exchanged significantly influence their thoughts, emotions, behaviors, and relationships. And the idea of being a speaker and being involved in an interactive model or a transactional model is to be easily understood. We want our messages to get across to the other in the intended way you want it to, and not to have any unintended information. So defining interpersonal communication, dynamic, which we investigated, typically transactional, we know things are happening simultaneously, and a new word, diactic, meaning two. Impact creating, because ultimately in an interpersonal communication situation, you want the other person to see your point of view, to do things the way you want them done, rather than to control and to order. There is a very effective conflict management situation where the other person that you're dealing with will see your perspective, will gain knowledge on your perspective, and you can gain compliance or gain them to do what you want, or start the project on time like you want, something in that fashion. So Buber names two ways of relating to others. And this is that little video. It's about less than 7 minutes that I've also put onto your Blackboard, which explains the I, thou, I, it a little bit more and with better examples. But because we have a diactic, which is just two people. So if you went to a restaurant and you had someone serving you, it's more of an impersonal communication or a reciprocation, as explained in I, it. So you order food, they write it down, and they bring it to you. Whereas I, thou are deeper relationships. So you might know that a server from your neighborhood, it could be a neighbor. So you have a more neighbor to neighbor interpersonal relationship. So there is a difference between just reciprocation and someone that you have built a relationship with. And again, relationship refers to the type of communication situation in the one-on-one communication. And I know when you hear the word relationship, you may be thinking more of an intimate situation, and it is not.